everyone, to another exciting of Healing for the Soul podcast. And it's season 4, episode number 7. I am your host, Robin Stoltman with Healing for the Soul podcast. Today I have my guest, Brendan Wall with Dad the Man podcast on the show, talking about what it takes to be a great dad. And before I get started, remember, every week I feature different guests to help you become the best version of yourself through various methods you may not have heard of or thought of. So let's get started. Thank you, Brendan, for being here. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Robin. I'm super excited, super grateful for the opportunity to chat with you today. And yeah, just looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. I want to know, because obviously I'm a woman. I only have the mom side of everything. And obviously we know that there's huge differences between how moms handle children and between like how dads handle children. So what was your first realization that you are a father?
Oh, that's a good question. So to take this all the way back, I'm a little long-winded, so I'll apologize in advance. I'll take it back to the origin story. So going into finding out that I was going to be a dad. So in that moment, so before that, if you rewind from there, my wife and I, we met in school and college. We got married right out of school. We moved to Nashville. I was just starting my career. And I had the huge advantage of being raised by parents who taught me the values of hard work. Like they really intentionally poured everything they had into me and didn't just kind of let me wander in life. So I kind of went into my first job. I was like, all right, I'm ready to go. And I wanted to kind of follow my parents' model of I'm going to work super, super hard right off the bat. And before we have kids and try to get my legs under me. And like I had this whole idea in my head, right? Like this was my plan. And I remember speaking with my wife and I said, if we can wait 5 years before you have kids, I feel like that'll give me a good chance to really run and gun and get after it. And then we'll kind of stop and reassess. And I don't remember how long it was after that conversation, but it was not long. So like less than a month. So we basically find that like I come home from work one day, week, 2 weeks later, and there's a little onesie and a pair of shoes and a positive pregnancy test on the table. And I was like, oh my gosh. Okay. Well, foot and mouth, I literally just agreed to let's wait 5 years. And, we were 5 months into being married and found out I was going to be a dad. And in that moment, it's crazy when you get just hit from the side. You're like, oh my gosh, my plan is no longer like, we're going to have to change plans. But if you've ever known somebody maybe who hasn't been able to get pregnant or, you hear so many stories about people who struggle in that regard. And I just remember feeling like, obviously I was scared and I was overwhelmed and like there was all the panic. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm so glad there's not a picture of my face when I found out. But when it started to settle, I was just so grateful. It's just like, this is a miracle. This is a great thing. And obviously, like I said, super scared. I ditched the plan. I had that great plan. I always say I had my plan. God had his won, no doubt. And I'm super thankful that it did. That was, now 5 years ago. My oldest son just turned 5 in October. So that's pretty much how we started. And we've added one more little boy to the family since then. And we're actually working to adopt a third child right now. But that's very up in the air. So yeah, I told you I'm a little long-winded, but that's pretty much how I found out that I was going to be a dad.
That's awesome. Because I know like we all have our different experiences. And yeah, I was one that dealt with the infertility. I had it for 5.5 years and it's extremely painful. I would not wish it on anybody, but thankfully the doctors were wrong and I found hypnosis works to become pregnant. So that was very helpful in my case with that because yeah, children, they are definitely a blessing. And I agree with you. God has his plans and we have ours. And it's like, God I swear some days they're up there laughing at me like, you want this and you want this and you want this. Well, here, I'm just going to shoot some dice at you and let's see what we get. And I was like, so I basically like, I'm just like, you know what, God, you have this. And so that's where I'm at my point in my life. I'm like, you know what? I threw like a lot of the plans I had for business. I threw a lot of these different things out the door. Of course, my business came after having the kids, but I'm just like, I'm just throwing them out the door. It doesn't matter because I tried to plan, my plan. And it's like, his always turns out better.
Yep.
Like every time. So in your process of learning about, and when you found out you were a dad and you had to throw your plans all out the window, I'm sure that this plan has turned out to be a lot better for you, especially because now you
100%.
got your podcast.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I'm so thankful that my plan did not win. Let's put it that way. I sit here and
Yes.
like I said, so
Same
just
here.
blessed and fortunate to have my two boys, and my wife and I talk about them all the time, and they're just the biggest blessings in our lives. They're like our little best friends, and we're really trying to cherish that while they're young. I know that we're gonna blink and they're all of a sudden not gonna want to hang out with us. So that's something we try
Yes.
to remind ourselves of constantly, and the little moments where it's like, Dad, look at this, Dad, look at this, Dad, look at this, Dad, can you help me with this? I mean, it's just like nonstop, right? I try to just keep
Yes.
reminding myself, like, this is gonna stop. If I wish for this to stop, I'm gonna get what I ask for, and then I'm gonna be kicking myself, like, man, I wish I'd just been present, back in that time when they did look up to me like I was a superhero.
You are 100% right. I have ran into too many parents that are older that are telling me, well, you're gonna miss the poopy stages. And I'm like, I'm not gonna miss that stage. I don't like that stage. But I will miss like the toddler years and that. I've got all toddlers and one preschooler right now. But still, it's like I do that as well. It's like try to remember they're not this little forever. They will start to turn away. So when you learn, or how did you learn with this short period of time, raising kids? You have one that's 5.
Mm-hmm.
How did you learn, or when did you find out that it's up to you to be yourself? So the way you could be the father that your kids need.
Well, that is a long and ongoing journey of trying to figure that out. But I would say it all started, my oldest was probably, I guess he was about 3 at the time. My youngest had been born. He was somewhere between, 6 months and a year. And I was working a lot. I had a job that demanded a lot. Seasonally, it was very busy, just like 80, 90 hours a week, working a lot of Saturdays and Sundays, traveling a lot for weeks at a time. And I also, on top of that, like I said, I had the huge blessing of being raised by very present parents. So I wanted to be that. I also, but I really wanted to push for my career, and I hadn't quite let go of, something's got to give. And that one thing that really kind of gave was like taking care of myself a little bit. And long story short, I spiraled myself out a little bit. It was like seasonal burnout for a couple of years in my career. And at this point in time, it kind of just came to a head, and I slipped into some depression and really struggled. And that was not something that I'd ever felt before. I'd felt burnout plenty of times. I tend to be a little bit binary by nature. So if I'm onto something, I'm going with it, and then I struggle to stop. So I'd felt burnout, but this was the first time where like I'd be walking around the house and just like meltdown tears, right? Just losing it. Didn't want to get out of bed. I'm someone who's very like disciplined and routine oriented. Just couldn't have cared less about that at that point in time. And my wife, and through a lot of prayer and everything, kind of we pulled ourselves out of that. We moved our family to a different city, just kind of said fresh start. Now we're here in Chattanooga, Tennessee. My wife grew up here. I took a new job, and the idea was it's going to be a fresh start, right? And I'm going to be able to redesign my life and with a little bit more balance, a little bit more family intention, and really be in a spot to build back a little bit, more strongly and on a stronger base. Long story short, I did the same thing again. I just pushed and burned out. And it wasn't until COVID happened and quarantine hit, and I realized, when you're forced to sit at home and you're forced to sit still, and you really have to think, like you lose your outlet for the stress that you've been utilizing. I realized I'd just been using work as like an outlet for the stress of the responsibility of trying to provide for my family, trying to be a great dad, trying to be a great husband, trying to do all these things. But when you're forced to really sit still and think about it, and you don't have that outlet anymore, I always say, I feel like God pinned me down and forced me to look at my life and look at the life that I was missing. Like I was missing breakfast most mornings with my kids. I was missing dinners with my kids, and then everything in between. And then when I was getting time with him, I was distracted with work emails and all that kind of stuff. But what I realized, the big lesson for me was like, I was doing all this stuff. I was really pushing, working hard. And I kept saying, I'm doing this for my family. But I realized that was kind of a big load of BS, to be completely honest. Like, I realized that what I said I was doing for my family was really just coming at their expense. And I'm not here to demonize hard work.
True.
Like, I still believe in that 100%. But I was so, my defaults were just so upside down. Like, if you take my priority, my faith, my marriage, my kids, and then everything else is after that, my time allocation was the opposite of that. So everything else was getting the most time, and the things that were the most important were just getting the scraps. And I realized in that time that if I don't step up to the plate and I don't make a change, nothing is going to change. I have to be the one to step up and make something happen. I have to be a better husband. I have to be a better father, and I have to do those things first. And the biggest part of doing that for me was really taking care of myself first, becoming more disciplined, and not letting, work continue to be this outlet for stress that I felt, right? Like, don't run away from the problems. Don't run away from hard conversations or, difficult parenting conversations or anything, whatever it may be. I found for me, work was just kind of accidentally became an escape in a lot of ways. Now, I was pushing, I was doing well, but at the end of the day, I was letting what I said I was doing for my family come at their expense. And in all of that, again, I warned you, I'm long-winded, but in all of that was where I just realized I have to step up as a man, husband, and father for my family and lead them. And that revelation as well also led to me starting my podcast. And that's kind of the premise and the backstory of Dad the Man. So I'm basically with that show trying to stop the guy who does not have the revelation that I had, when his kids are 16, 17, 18, going off on their own, getting ready. They're too cool for mom and dad. They're heading out, and he's sitting there kicking himself like, I missed it. I missed the point because I was distracted by something that was less important than the most important things. Or the guy who's grown apart from his wife, and they're, in a tough spot, and they're way on down the line. Like, I'm trying to stop that guy now. So that's really, again, long-winded answer, but that's pretty much what inspired me to step up and really try to figure this thing out. And I'll say, I have not figured it out. I'm a long way from it, but I think that's the goal really is just to keep pursuing it rather than to ever feel like we've got it all figured out anyway. So,
well, yeah, that's like when I would agree with you, because there's some people that have questioned I shouldn't put expert after my title. Like, I should not put intuitive mindset expert. And I'm like, well, why? I'm like, to me, an expert means that we never stop learning. We always keep growing. We keep helping other people. To me, that's what an expert is. Like, we do everything on ourselves, and then we show other people how to do it. That's just my take on it. So I'm glad that you're doing this, because you are right. There's so many dads out there that need this. My husband's probably, I'm going to say he probably is. I know he is. He's one that needs that too, because it's like, I've learned, what you learned is through the pandemic was that you have to take care of yourself first. And that's what I keep telling people after I learned that, because women, we are specifically raised to take care of the children, to take and put our needs last, put everyone else's first, including our husbands. And in my situation, the roles are reversed. But it's like, I'm saying, you know what? I got to take care of me first, because you do realize that it's like when you're sick, you don't got anybody to go take care of your kids. You got to take care of them.
Right.
Sure, you can go.
And it's hard to do, though.
The doctor, you can't leave them there. You can't leave them there and be like sick and everything else that happens. It's like, you got to be the one to show them. And then it's just amazing, like all the different things when it comes to like the parenting aspect that so many people, they either forget or they don't talk about it. Like on your show, like I told you, I really appreciated the Instagram versus the reality one. We talked about when your son just took and pooped, and I'm like, yeah, tell me about it. Nobody tells you that penis obsession starts when you're little. Nobody tells you that.
Yep.
And nobody sit there and tells you, like your kids will just all of a sudden want to take off their clothes. My kids are playing tornado in the house all of a sudden. It's like, We don't need you to pretend like you're playing tornado. We already have a tornado without you pretending like it.
Yes. Yeah. And it's crazy because like just on the Instagram thing, I mean, we all look on Instagram and we're like, I'm guilty of this too. Like if you looked at my feed, you might even think like, oh man, look at their cute little family. They've got it all going on. But like that's just not even close to the truth. And like you alluded to like in that episode, I'm telling a story about how I'm seeing toddlers basically reading novels and mine's just literally pulling his pants down and pooping on the floor. Like but that's okay. Because to me,
it's life.
I think Instagram has like just put this unfortunate point of relativity of like, hey, this is what we need it to look like. This is what we like. We want to be able to present this as well, but it's false. Like it's just not. It's not real, and it makes us think that like the idea is that we want to have bliss and be comfortable, and like we want, but you don't want that either because that's boring. Like there's no excitement, there's no contrast, there's no ups and downs, there's no sweet and salt, there's none of that in that. So I always say like it's the little mundane moments of our lives with our kids, when my kid's pooping on the floor, when they're pulling the Christmas tree down. Like those are the moments that you're going to remember. They're crazy, they're stressful in the moment, but like those are the good old days. And if you are blessed enough to be in a position where you can literally be living through the good old days, and I put that in air quotes because it's crazy in the moment, but at the end of the day, that's what you're going to look back on and reflect on. And I try to remind myself something that's really helped me with that, like just staying, or I guess not getting swept up in that too much. Is I like to, this is going to sound crazy, but I like to basically imagine myself on my deathbed and looking back and just being like, to the gut, what am I glad I did? What do I regret that I did? Like, how do I want to have handled these situations? And I always think when I'm in that position, like, you're going to care about how you showed up in those moments. Like, you're not going to want to look back and say, oh, I was just trying to rush through bedtime. Like when my 5-year-old, he's always asking, can we read another book? Can we read another book? Can we read another book? And in the moment, sometimes I'm like, buddy, I got to go sit down. I'm exhausted. Like I'm tired. I'm ready to go have a glass of wine with mom. But I have to like go there in my mind to really calibrate in the moment to say, these are the moments we're going to remember. So I'm going to buckle down and like, of course I'll read you another book. But again, not always easy. Easier said than done.
Yeah. I'm thinking that I'm about the third book and I'm like, I can't talk anymore. I talk for a living. I'm just like, when I go home, I don't even want to talk anymore. Because like I said, that's all I do. I'm glad that you brought that up because you are not crazy for that. Imagining like you're on your deathbed, because that's actually something I've been focusing with people on a lot, because that's how I found out that I was doing stuff that other people wanted me to do. And I literally asked myself that question. I'm like, I'm on my deathbed. What's my deathbed regret? Because we all have them. We all know what they already are before we get there. We don't even have to be there. And so mine was listening to everybody else and what they wanted for me. So now that's been my mission of, I'm not going to let what other people want for me become, that's what I do. So I'm glad that you said that, because that is true. You use that deathbed scenery to say, hey, what can I do? What can I do differently? Because you are going to miss those moments.
Yep. And I'll say, if you do that and you like sit with that for a minute and you think about it, like any little like emotion that comes up that feels like dissonance, or anything that comes up and you feel like a little bit of shame or regret, like be prepared for that. Cause like, that's a good thing. Like you want to figure that out now. Like when I try to do that, I hope that comes up, because that means I can fix the problem now. Like ignorance isn't bliss. Ignorance is not bliss in this. Ignorance is living a life that you're going to regret one day. So I said, it's a tough exercise to do it, but I encourage everybody to give it a shot.
Well, yeah, I do too, because it's the most powerful thing you can do. Because I know too many people. That's why I've always asked people, I'm like, you think your deathbed regret is going to be that you wish you would have worked more? No, your deathbed regret is going to be that you would have been with your family more. You wish you would have paid more attention to your kids when they were growing up. You wish you would have done more with your kids. You don't sit here and wish you would have worked more. Yeah. You wish you had more money, because that, and money helps all of us. But I mean, like, I'm just saying the family is what matters.
100%. And you see this a lot. People always say like, I don't have time for it, right? Like there's just too much
Yes.
going on. I think we can all like as parents, like, hey man, we could all use a little bit more time. Well,
Yes.
I've been thinking about this a lot. And
Mhm.
the reality is we're never going to get more time. Like
No.
there's 24 hours in a day. So we might as well stop asking for it. It's a waste of time. It's at this point, I boil it down. I'm like, I'm telling my kids every day they can't complain. And I'm sitting here complaining, saying, I wish I had more time. Like, not going to do it. Got to set a better example. But what I've realized that what's helped me a lot is not trying to get more time, but just trying to be better with the time that I've got. So it's like, if I'm at work, like I'm going to work my tail off and I'm going to try to outwork every other person here, and not like to bring anybody else down or anything, but I'm going to be the most efficient I can there. When I come home, I'm going to try to put my phone somewhere where I can't reach it. And that's a tough one. That's a tough one, but I'm going to put it somewhere where I don't, it's not in my pocket. And if I only get 30 minutes that day with my kids, they're going to get 30 minutes with me focusing on them. You know what I mean? And then the same thing with my wife as well. Like for us, it's usually we get the kids down around 7 and then we've got a little bit of time after that. And if we're going to sit there and, maybe we're going to watch television, maybe we're going to just have a conversation or eat dinner, like I'm going to focus on that. But if we do that, like rather than wanting more time, we just have to be better stewards of the time that we have. And if you think you're killing it in this regard, I just did this the other day and completely like super embarrassed, looked at my screen time on my phone as I'm saying, man, I wish I had more time, like 4+ hours of screen time, like half of it's social media, stuff like that. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm asking for more time. Well, there's 4 hours. Like how much of that is necessary for what I'm doing? Maybe 1 hour is necessary, maybe, but that's 3 more hours back in my day. So I encourage everybody to give that a shot too.
That is huge. I've heard people say, well, use a timer and this and that. And I'm like, well, some of that stuff works, some of it doesn't. For me, the timer doesn't work. Mm-hmm. But I know I don't like being on social media all the time. I really, really don't. So I struggle because I have to be on it. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it's like if I didn't have a business, I would have nothing to do with it. I honestly could go without. But that's the only reason why I stay on it. Mm-hmm. Because it drains all the energy. I'm like, there's so many other things I can do. And you are like, there was your more hours right there.
Yep.
So now it's making that shift of, okay, when can I do this? When can I do that?
Yes.
So are you working on that right now then?
Yes. Big time trying to do that. The screen time thing is tough because similarly, I use it for my podcast a lot. Like it's a huge thing. And it's very easy to kind of slip out of, hey, I'm working on something to like, hey, I'm just scrolling. So I'm exploring that, working on that. The biggest thing for me has been putting my phone somewhere where I can't reach it. And it sounds dumb. Like it sounds like, oh, that's not going to work. But if there's like the psychological barrier of I have to stand up and walk, even if it's just to the other side of the room to pick it up, you're not going to do the reflex, just pull it out and pop up on Instagram. Like that's just, you kind of eliminate that.
Is true.
A lot.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Huge challenge. It's one of those things. It's like, I think we're all more addicted to it than we want to believe or admit, even to ourselves. And that, I think that theme carries true in a lot of these things that we've been talking about. Like to make a change or to say, I'm going to do something better. There almost has to be this like admission that we're not doing the best that we can do now. And we haven't been for a period of time in the past. So it's that you have to get to that line and you got to be able to not make excuses to keep making the mistake, but give yourself grace to forgive yourself for maybe what you haven't done well in the past and fix it moving forward. Because like I said before, same thing applies. Ignorance isn't bliss. Ignorance is maybe not being the best parent or best spouse that you could be.
I would agree with that because it's one of the hardest things to really deal with is being a better parent, being a better spouse. Because I was even looking at my husband last night. I'm like, he gets my clothes ready before I go to bed at night. He has my clothes ready for the next day. He has my coffee ready so I can go out the door. He has like all the stuff done. And I'm like, I'm so lucky to have you. I mean, like, I don't know how many husbands would allow their wives to hypnotize them online either, like what mine did. But I'm just saying, I'm like thinking of all these things. I'm like, I got the best damn husband that's alive. Because he's doing so much. And I'm sitting here like, why aren't you cleaning? Why aren't you doing this? And it's like, well, he's doing X, Y, Z. And so I had to stop myself even in that moment.
Mm-hmm. And that's a huge point too. Like you saying that to him is like, I know that's like, gasoline on his fire. Like he's ready to keep doing it for you and going to bat for you every day. Like I promise you that, like, just 5 seconds of just having the thought, expressing that to him, that doesn't just change that moment for him. That propels him moving forward too. And that's a huge point too. Just not taking our spouses for granted. Because as parents, we know there's a lot going on. And sometimes I'm guilty of this. I just assume that my wife's fine. Like she's a superhero. Like she's fine. Like I know that. But the reality is, like I was saying before, she's my top priority. I gotta be pouring it back into that because it's, that's. So I just wanted to comment on that because I think that's such a huge point of not taking our spouses for granted and hand raised. I'm very guilty of that at times.
Well, yeah, that's where I was at. And I'm like, I can't do this. That's like, for the longest time, I've had people say, well, you're doing all this, for the business. And I'm like, well, I'm not. And I kept telling him, I'm like, you have the most important part. I'm like, if it wasn't for you watching the kids and it wasn't for him doing my coffee and, stuff like that for me, I'm like, do you honestly think I'd be doing this? No. I'm like, it's a give and take. And it's just trying to find that balance. But I'm glad that you mentioned that for what I was telling him, being thankful that he's doing that because he's not the best at saying, well, thank you, but I'm sure that's one of the man pride part of it is we don't want to admit, but
yeah. No doubt about it. Yeah. That's not expressing emotion isn't something we're always naturally great at, but we can always work to be better at it for sure.
That is true. So I appreciate that because it's like I sometimes wonder, like if, like you said, when we get so busy with the kids, and then we forget about our spouse, and it's like, what about them? And I think that's why. See, I'm trying to avoid the 20-year, the 25-year divorce because when the kids leave the home, that's when the divorces happen, or when they hit teenage years because they fall out of love with each other because they forgot that they needed to spend time with each other. Like, why did they get married?
And there's a huge point of accountability in that too. So like, not just like him hoping that you will say something to him, but like if he, or you were saying your husband's not great at maybe expressing that when sometimes you may need a little bit more of like a pat on the back, a little validation, like that's okay. But the accountability, I would say for you is to tell him that. Like, I think that's a huge mistake that I know I've made it in my marriage. I see other people make it all the time. We expect the other person to know exactly how we're feeling and what we need. But
I do that all the time.
We have to let them know. And again, hand raised, I have been the worst about this. And if I hadn't started my podcast, I don't know that I ever would have learned it because that's been taught to me pretty recently. But that little change, that's like a 1-degree shift that can make a monumental change.
I agree. I went to a family life event in November 2021, and because my husband wanted us to go. So we went, and it was not like the best time in our marriage just because I'm like, well, I want you to actually show that you want our marriage to continue. So when we went there, not only like I already knew that he wasn't like me because obviously we're two different people, two different households, that we grew up in. But it's like, even at that point, there was a lady asked, well, what do you want him to help you with in the business? And the fact that I could not give her an answer, and I'm sitting here thinking to myself, well, if I can't give her an answer and I can't give my husband an answer, how is he supposed to know what he's supposed to do? Because I don't know what he's supposed to do. So then when I started asking him, can you help me make sure that I get my 5 phone calls done? Can you help me make sure that I'm doing this and doing that? He's been holding me to it. And I'm like, what?
There you go. There you go. It's that simple.
Yeah, no, if we could just work on the cleaning, we'd be doing good.
Oh yeah, I get a trouble for that all the time. I'm terrible.
Well, with all the kids and everything, it's like I said, they're playing tornado, and it's like, we don't need you to pretend like you're playing tornado. You are the tornado.
You are the tornado. That's exactly right.
Yes.
One last thing I'll drop right there, what you were just saying about just talking about communicating what we do need, I will recommend the book, The 5 Love Languages. That's something that's made a big difference for us. Like I know now, like my wife's primary love language is acts of service. And like I kind of always knew that, but just didn't always express love that way. And mine's words of affirmation for sure. And I read the book and I was like, hey, I know this is your love language now. This is helpful. This is my love language. Can we try to adjust how we're handling things? And it makes a tremendous difference. It's one of those books you read it and you're like, surely that can't make that big of a difference, but it does.
I will keep that in mind because we have the book. He hasn't read it yet, but it's like, I already know like his is acts of service and mine is quality time. Like I'd rather spend time than anything else. But then it's like when you were talking earlier about how you're using work as an outlet for your stress. And then I'm like, yeah, that's what I've been doing. And it doesn't feel so good. So I'm like, okay, now I got to look at my schedule and say, hey, I got to cut it down to what feels better for me and take care of me, because there's a lot of things to do with parenting. And then our spouse and then work and everything else. It's just gets overwhelming. So what do you feel is important for dads to know about raising their kids to be productive members in society?
That's a great question. And I think it's a question that doesn't get asked enough or considered enough. I think the biggest thing is, I think some guys try to hold on to like the traditional gender roles a little bit of like, I'm going to go to work and work's the most important thing in the world. And if I say I'm at work, don't bother me, like I'm gone. And then that leaves a lot of burden on mom and home. And if it's flipped, same idea. I think taking ownership in the role that a dad has to play, like if you are not, this is the way I think about it. If I'm not with my kids, like my kids are young, right? They're never by themselves. If I'm not with my kids, then someone else is raising them at every point in time, hopefully a lot of the time that's my wife, whether it's my parents, my in-laws, their school teachers, their television, whatever it is. If you are not with them as a parent, someone else is teaching them. That's a good thing in a lot of ways. But if there are things that you want your kids to know, like if there are things that you think are the most important, and there's a lot of things that we all think are important, right? Like we have to take ownership of teaching them that. So I think we have to break away from like, it's like we think of like before I was saying, hey, these are my priorities. It's my faith, my marriage, my kids, and then everything else. But like the default of what I give time to before was completely flipped upside down. So it was always default work most important. And then all these things kind of just slipped to the bottom. But it shouldn't be that way. So I think the most important thing is for dads to realize, like, if raising your kids is the most important thing to you, like treat it like it is. Like treat it like it's the most important thing in the world. Like think about all the time, like as professionals we spend working on our job, as like people who enjoy different hobbies, like guys just think stereotypically how much time and money we spend playing golf or playing pool or whatever our hobby is. Like we treat it like we're going to go pro, even though none of us are making the PGA Tour. We would have already if we were going to. But then you think about how much time we give to becoming a better husband, becoming a better father. And a lot of times that's literally like 0%. We're just kind of winging it and hoping that we get through it. So like we're not babysitting our kids. You have to raise your kids. And that's an intentional action that we just have to step up and take control of that. And then, like I said, I think it's really just taking ownership of that and recognizing that it's not a burden. It's a blessing to get to raise your kids, and taking ownership of that is that mindset shift. I think everything else that's important is really going to trickle down from that one switch right there.
I would agree with you.
Awesome.
That's extremely helpful, especially for all of our listeners and our viewers, to really get that point driven, that you have to be intentional. You really do. You got to be intentional with your marriage. You got to be intentional with your children. You just got to be intentional with what kind of life you want to have. You want to have the life of where you complain and die miserable, like so many people already do? Or do you want to take and actually have the life that you know that you're capable of having?
Yep, no doubt. And I think the opposite is true. I was just kind of speaking to I guess men in general. That's just kind of what I default to. That's the audience I usually speak to. But if you are the stay-at-home parent and you're at home primarily with the kids, I would give you the exact same advice. Like, treat that like a job, and and take pride in it like that's a job as well. My least favorite phrase in the entire world, and like, I'm not a violent person, but this makes me want to smack people. I'm like, when people say, like, you overhear someone say, just a stay-at-home mom.
That drives me nuts.
I lose it. Because I say to those people, have you ever spent more than 2 hours with a child? And then like, think about that. Like, if you're not the stay-at-home parent, I encourage you, and I've talked about this on my show, I encourage you to watch your kids for a long weekend. Send your wife to go spend some time with her friends or whatever it is. You take the kids for 3 days, 2-3 days. You be in charge of getting them up, keeping them alive. One, just like that alone is a miracle if you can do it. Keeping them fed, keeping them dressed, keeping them entertained, realizing all the things that go into the day. Like, there's so much, and that's so psychologically and emotionally draining. Having done it myself, I kind of had to put myself in that vantage point, so I know how hard that can be. Like, if you are the parent that's at home, take pride in that role. And then, to your point before, like, you also have to take care of yourself. So raise your hand and like, hey, I got to go for a walk. Hey, I need to go walk in circles at Target. Whatever it is, like, getting away from it sometimes can, we come back a little bit refreshed and can be better parents. But I've seen people be afraid or timid almost to raise their hand as a full-time parent and say, hey, I'm tired, but I shouldn't be tired because my spouse is out working and I'm just the stay-at-home parent. So that's a switch you have to make in your own mind. You are not just a stay-at-home parent. That is a load of BS. Like, you are the hero right now. Like, if you are watching the kids, you are the one doing the most important thing. And that is, like I was speaking before, that you are the one raising your kids. And that's the most important thing. So take pride in that role and treat it like the job that it is.
Exactly. Because there's days you've got to be the judge, the jury. You got to be like,
oh yeah,
you got to be the lawyer. You got to be like all these different roles into one.
Oh yeah.
And then you got to be the maid. You got to be the chauffeur and everything else. And I'm just like, I even did that on my own podcast just by myself. I'm like, if you're saying you're just a stay-at-home mom, forget it. You are not. You are so much more than that. Because
you're a superhero.
Yeah, you got to be. Because you got to do so much for your kids, and then they're expecting you to teach them. And that's one thing that we're going to start doing. I've already was doing some homeschooling, but now we're adding that to the mix of everything. And I'm just like, I got to figure it out with my schedule. But I am going to find a way to make it work because that's important for me. Because my kids learn the best from me. And then I get all the other people to say, well, they do better in school and this and that. I'm like, but no, I understand the concept. But I want my kids to think for themselves. I want my kids to take and interact with other people, yes. But they've got a lot of siblings, so I'm like, I'm not worried about that. Just saying, I got like a lot. I got 5 kids total, and I've got another one on the way. So it's like, I don't know if it's like a baseball team or somebody was trying to tell me what kind of team I'm going for.
I think you got a basketball team there.
Yeah. Okay, that's basketball one. Okay, thank you. That helps. Because see, I don't watch sports. I like to play them, so that helps.
Yeah, there we go.
Well, I have appreciated so much of the different information, especially, like I said, from the dad side, because I just know the mom side of it.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate it.
Of course, yeah. Flattered to be able to come on and speak to you and get to know a little bit about what you do and speak to your audience. This is awesome. This has been a lot of fun.
So I highly recommend for everyone to take and tune into Dad the Man podcast that Brendan Wall hosts, because like I said, I listen to some of them and I listen to podcasts off and on, but I don't listen to the whole thing. But his podcast, I have. So Dad the Man is the podcast to go to if you are listening to it at all, or if you haven't, get on it and start watching it and start tuning into it. So thank you for your time, Brendan. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Robin. Thanks for shouting out the show. It's been a fun little project that I told the story at the beginning, but just started it this fall, and I've been super fortunate to get to speak to some really cool people. And so we put out 1 episode a week. It's every Tuesday. But yeah, Dad the Man, you can find it anywhere that you listen to podcasts. I think at this point, I think it's on everything. But for sure the bigger players at least. But yeah, thank you so much for having me on. It's been an awesome conversation.
Thank you. Bye.